What better way to spend your childhood than by doing silly stuff on mini bikes with your friends? Well, that's how Larry Fletcher, or Fletch as he's better known, got his start in the motorcycle world. Fast forward a few decades, and Fletch found himself falling in love with vintage British motorcycles, old-school rocker culture, and the Chicago motorcycle scene at large. From there, he brought a bit of the UK to the US, starting a local chapter of the legendary 59 Club, becoming president of the Chicago wing of the Ton Up Club, and eventually becoming the historian for Triumph motorcycles. Nowadays, Fletch is the guy behind the big biker blowout known as MOTOBLOT, a huge celebration of hot rod and rocker culture and just about everything and anything on two wheels. As he celebrates over 20 years of putting on moto events throughout the Second City, Fletch is still doing silly stuff on motorcycles. Now, he's just doing it with a few thousand of his closest friends. This is Larry Fletcher. I'm your host, Mark Long, and you're listening to Driven to Ride. All right, Larry Fletcher, you are on Driven to Ride. Thanks for being here, sir.
Awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
But let's start from the beginning. What do most people kind of know you for? What would you say is your claim to fame?
Well, pretty much motorcycle in Chicago. I do a ton of motorcycle events. So, the motorcycle guy, is kind of, which has been used many times, but that's kind of what I hear a lot because I've been doing motorcycle events in Chicago since the mid 90s, basically. So around the scene here in Chicago, that's what people know me for.
Okay. Is Chicago your native home or?
No, I'm from Wisconsin originally. Germantown, just north of Milwaukee is my home turf. I've been down here since the early 80s, basically. I relocated to Chicago.
Okay. You're in good company. We've talked to Peter Egan of Madison.
Sure, absolutely.
And Bridget McCutcheon. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who she is, but
yeah.
She is like right on the border of, I think, Minnesota and Wisconsin. So
okay, yeah.
And I got a soft spot for Wisconsin. I used to go up there all the time as a kid.
Right.
I had some family that had a cabin way up in Eagle River. So I've been all over.
Oh, yeah.
I've
been up there many times.
So, and some great riding roads too, actually. So
yeah, there's really some good riding up there for sure.
Did you learn to ride up in Wisconsin or after you got down here?
Actually, I started in Wisconsin because I grew up in Germantown. I basically grew up right next to like motorcycle trails, like the woods. So my buddies, mini bikes, dirt bikes was kind of the rage, building jumps, and doing silly stuff that, you don't see too often anymore without helmets and gear. But just being crazy youth, on motorcycles, dirt bikes. Back in like the late 60s and early 70s, mid 70s in Chicago, or I'm sorry, in Germantown is where and then when I moved to Chicago, I was off of bikes for a while, but then I got back into it again. When I got close to 30, I think I figured out what a great way to commute instead of dealing with this horrendous traffic sometimes. So bikes was an easier way to get around, and I love getting back in the saddle again. It was great.
Is it just because of the commute thing, or was there something that kind of got you back into it? Or
yeah, I mean, I worked in the clubs back in those days. Me and some of my buddies were riding, and we had affinities for motorcycles. So I bought an old Triumph, I think back in like '89. I think was when I got back into riding, and I bought an old Triumph Bonneville from the shop over on off of Western in Chicago, like this old biker dude, kind of from the bike, similar from Bike Riders fame. He was definitely old school from those days, and he had an old Triumph Bonneville, and we got the thing running, and that's kind of how I got back on bikes again, was riding vintage bikes.
Okay. Is that kind of what, like, that moment that you were hooked on riding motorcycles, or was that maybe back from the dirt bike days?
I definitely missed it, and once I got back on again, I was like, what have I been missing? So, and I really love old bikes. I'm super into old motorcycles, and I've always been a fan. So, it was like the timing was right. And like I said, I did use it to use kind of vintage bikes, old Triumphs and a bunch of other bikes too, that I kind of used them as commuter bikes when I was younger, to get around town. And it was just, was that much easier to navigate Chicago.
on a
motorcycle.
Sure. Yeah. If you can get around cars, I'm just picturing like a one-way street in a residential area. You've got like two or both sides of the street completely full with cars. and somebody's coming one way and you're coming the other way, it's way easier to get around on a motorcycle.
Exactly. Yeah, I had an old Trump Bonneville. I think it was a 65. It had TT pipes on it. It was a total screamer, so my neighbors weren't a huge fan, but it was a lot of fun to ride around. That's for sure.
Yeah. So you said you were working in the clubs. Are you talking about like dance clubs, bar clubs? Or are you talking about motorcycle clubs?
No, I worked in bars. Basically, I worked.
Okay.
It even goes back all the way to in Milwaukee. Before I moved to Chicago, I worked at a nightclub called Park Avenue, which was called the nightclub. It was basically a disco because this goes back to, like I said, I think 1981, 82.
Sure.
And then when I moved to Chicago in the later 80s, I worked at a bunch of clubs. I worked at Cairo, China Club, Kaboom, Crowbar. I kind of made the rounds. I was kind of friends with the club owners, and that scene was really cool because a lot of people were riding back in those days. So there always were lots of bikes at the bars and clubs, and it was cool to commute on bikes back in those days. So so I worked at a bunch of, like I said, Chicago bars basically.
Okay, yeah, and the reason I ask is because I know you got, or maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, did you start a motorcycle club in Chicago, or did you join it and you were like a founding member?
We started it. Well, yeah, it started basically. The 59 Club is a UK club, English club. It goes back to the rocker era of England in the 50s and 60s, and it was actually a charity club founded by a father called Father Bill Shergold, and he started the 59 Club back in 1959. And so it was kind of a motorcycle club for rockers, like the mods and rockers of Quadrophenia fame. Sure. And so I started up a Chicago chapter in 95 or 96. Yeah. And it was basically a vintage bike club. So, and we were, official chapter of the 59 Club England. And so, we paid our dues to England and got our badges and patches and stuff like that. And all proceeds would go to children's charities in England. So it was pretty cool. Yeah, it was kind of neat. And later on, we evolved into the Ton Up Club Chicago in 2005, which is there's chapters all over the world of the Ton Up Club, and it's very similar. It's kind of dedicated to vintage motorcycling, British bikes, European bikes, and kind of like rocker mateship, working on your rides, riding, stuff like that. So the Ton Up Club is still going strong. And it is, like I said, it's dedicated to kind of like the vintage scene.
Yeah. So it sounds like when you rediscovered your love for motorcycles, you kind of jumped in with both feet and just didn't look back.
I pretty much did. Yeah. It was kind of you could say it took, once I got that on that Triumph, basically things kind of went from there, and it was nonstop. There's been hundreds of bikes since then. I mean, I've been through many motorcycles, I still have, some vintage bikes, but I like to find bikes, restore them with my friends, get them on the road. I ride them for a while and I see something else I like. And so I kind of cycle through kind of to a certain extent because I want that experience of trying different bikes. And you only have limited garage space in Chicago. So you can't keep everything. But yeah, riding vintage bikes around Chicago has been kind of like what got me into, everything else basically in my life later on.
It sounds like you've been riding vintage bikes since before it was even cool to do so. I mean, I know there's a huge resurgence in vintage bikes now, and there has been for the last, 15, 20 years or so, and you can see it in design cues from, modern manufacturers and stuff. But what drew you to the vintage bikes? Because I mean, not to date either of us, but they were vintage back in the day too. So
exactly. Well, I think it's because I grew up on it. I mean, my family, my dad particularly was like a Steve McQueen fan. And, I don't have to explain to you the connection there. And with Triumph. And then obviously when I was growing up, just seeing like Marlon Brando in The Wild One or Steve McQueen in On Any Sunday. And, even like Clint Eastwood in Coogan's Bluff. But movies like that, Triumphs were kind of king, even Evel Knievel. When Evel Knievel started, before he switched to Harley, he even had his big crash on a Triumph at Caesar's Palace in 67 or 68. So, it seems like all the cool kids rode Triumphs back then. So, I definitely, being in the club scene in Chicago, I wanted to be one of the cool kids. So, it kind of fit there. So, and the whole rocker thing was cool too, because, they like to put studs and patches and, stuff on their bike. It had a lot of flair. on your leathers when you're a rocker. So
yeah, it's almost like proto punk. It's very like
exactly.
DIY, very all that kind of stuff. Somebody who maybe doesn't know the context of what we're talking about with mods versus rockers and the history of that kind of 60s cafe racer, vintage bike stuff. Can you kind of give like a brief history of the mods versus rockers and where this kind of like aesthetic and biker scene, kind of comes from?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's in England in the basically post-war England, basically in the 50s. It was kind of post-war austerity. They're teenagers of those days. They wanted to be mobile, so the rockers gravitated, which were the British bikers. They definitely gravitated towards like the British motorcycles, which were the king in the day. The Triumphs, Nortons, BSAs, Vincents, all that stuff. Those were homegrown bikes for them, and they could get their hands on them cheap. And so rockers, basically, you could get in England. They had like two different license requirements. It was like, I don't know, 250cc and lower and above.
Sure.
So you could start on a Triumph Cub or a BSA Bantam and then work your way up to like a Bonneville or a Commando. But so the rockers were the bikers, and then the mods came from kind of a different school. They were into the Vespas and Lambrettas, and they were definitely influenced by kind of like, they called it Northern Soul in England, but rhythm and blues music.
Oh, sure.
And they like to dress the part. It's really cool how both cultures, rockers and mods, were influenced by World War II. Like the rockers' uniform was basically a flyer's jacket from World War II. They took and the mods wore the parkas. They were like Korean War Army surplus, stuff that the younger generation could get inexpensively. And so they were basically wearing Army surplus clothing to ride their stuff. And a lot of that stuff was created in World War II for flyers, or even for, parcel delivery bike motorcycle riders and things like that. So they kind of adopted that culture. So you basically had two different cultures. You had the mods who were into rhythm and blues and Northern Soul, and the rockers who were into Chuck Berry and Elvis. They dressed differently. They hung out at different places. And they kind of had a legendary clash in Brighton in 1964 over the bank holiday, where a bunch of mods and rockers, descended on Brighton, which is like a seaside town in southern England. And there's, kind of created a little bit of a riot between the rival factions. And and it depicted in the movie Quadrophenia. If you ever seen the movie Quadrophenia by The Who,
right?
It came out in the late 70s, but it was about kind of that bank holiday clash of the mods and rockers in 1964. So it's kind of a cool culture, and it reflects back to the vintage bikes. They weren't vintage then, but when you're riding vintage bikes, and it's interesting how the rocker culture, their whole thing was customizing their motorcycles.
Sure.
And that whole custom culture that blew up in I would say the early 2000s. And first it was cafes. Cafe racers were huge.
Yeah.
I would say for 8 to 10 years. And then it kind of went to bobbers and choppers. And that's still really big, like kind of like the Born Free, chopper scene. And it's interesting to see how it's evolved. And but it all goes back to like the 50s. And even the chopper scene goes back to Easy Rider and that whole thing. Or and now with that great movie, The Bike Riders, that came out last year, that was based, in Chicago. The scene, the photos, the book by Danny Lyons, and the movie The Bike Riders was based in Northern Illinois and Chicago. So it goes back to that 60s biker culture that kind of turned into the whole chopper bobber scene. So everything, that's old is new again, it seems, in the culture. Yeah.
Yeah. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it's cool, through all the years of motorcycling, you see the ebbs and flows and things become popular, go down, come back. And I've seen that kind of over the last 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Going from being passionate about it and starting clubs, or starting chapters and you said hosting events. You've got a little event that you put on for about 20 years.
Yeah.
How did that get started? Tell me all about it.
Well, we were doing, I was doing bike shows in the 90s. We were doing like vintage and we call them like vintage classic and classic motorcycle shows.
Sure. Yeah.
So we started pretty small, get 100 bikes, couple 100 bikes, basically at a pub and kick tires and, drink pints. And it just kind of evolved. It first it was called Mods versus Rockers Chicago.
Okay.
And in 2005, that was when we started that event. And it was just basically a street fest. We did it commando style where we just kind of took over the street. But as it grew and got bigger, we basically had to close off streets and put up stages. And so for about 9 years, we did Mods versus Rockers. And then kind of I explained to you how the scene was changing from cafe racers to choppers and bobbers and hot rods. We decided to rebrand it as MOTOBLOT, which is kind of like encompasses all things moto. Whatever you're into, internal combustion motor, or even now with electric, to anything on two wheels, we embrace it.
Yeah.
So MOTOBLOT's been going on since 2014, and this is going to be our 12th year for MOTOBLOT in Chicago. And it's a motorcycle and hot rod street festival, with tons of music and vendors, and that's what we do here in Chicago.
So where does the term MOTOBLOT come from?
It's interesting. It goes back to my Ton Up Club history.
Oh, okay.
The London chapter did an event and still does an event every winter called Winter Blot.
Okay.
And the term blot is a Norse pagan word for it. It means a gathering with sacrifice. So blot is basically a pagan word for like a party, basically.
Okay.
And we just thought it was, so they kind of started it first. And I'm like, hey, when I was thinking about, changing from Mods versus Rockers, I like the whole blot philosophy. So I talked to those guys. I'm like, hey, I think I'm going to steal your idea. And they're like, go for it. So we started calling it MOTOBLOT in 2014, meaning it's just a gathering of the tribes, basically.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's really kind of grown from that original Mod versus Rockers vintage classic thing into all kind of, like you said, everything and hot rods. I mean, how has it grown over time? Has it been like kind of a step-by-step thing, or is it like 1 year that it just blew up and it's been big ever since?
It's really been great. It has been gradual to a certain extent. It keeps getting bigger every year. And, we've been adding bigger bands and more entertainment and more vendors. And so it just went from basically one block to like 5 blocks when as a street festival. So just as more people and there was more interest from vendors and sponsors, it just kind of grew from there. So we just needed more space to do mini bike races and to do whatever we decided we wanted to do that year for fun. We just needed more space to evolve. So that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah. So what is it now? I memean, you said it's like a couple of blocks. Like that's no small feat, man.
Well, no, in 2025, we're making a big change. We're moving it from a street festival where it was at Cobra Lounge and Fulton Street. And we're moving to a venue called the Salt Shed, which is an indoor-outdoor music festival area. It was the old Morton Salt factory, refinery.
I was going to ask. Yep.
On the Chicago River. It's kind of, the building itself is iconic. It's been on the Chicago River. Like when you took, I-94 into Chicago, you would see the Morton Salt like shed building, to your left as you're going into downtown Chicago. And it was right on the Chicago River. So a couple of years ago, it was repurposed as this kind of indoor-outdoor, music festival facility. And it's got all the infrastructure. Doing the street festival was difficult, because, you had to bring in everything. You had to close the street, set up the stages, and it was very difficult and exhausting. Yeah. So, this Salt Shed opened up a couple of years ago, and I've been kind of eyeing it. And the neighborhood that MOTOBLOT has been changing. It's been getting gentrified, and a lot of the property is for sale on that. Where it was now. Sure. And it's going to get purchased, and it's going to be a construction zone, if not this year, next year, so the writing was kind of on the wall that we needed to make a move. And that's when we talked to our new friends at the Salt Shed.
That's cool, man. Yeah, that's cool. Well, what can somebody expect from like going to, their first MOTOBLOT? Like what can we expect, like, as somebody who's never been to MOTOBLOT before?
Well, it's pretty much, I mean, if you're into motorcycles and hot rods and then the fashion and the music, and it kind of brings that all together.
Mhm.
We have a riding element. So we're going to have some of the streets around the Salt Shed closed for motorcycle parking. Plus we'll have we'll have a ride and motorcycle show in the Salt Shed, as well as kind of a curated, custom motorcycle show and vintage show. So all kinds of motorcycles. If you're interested in showing a bike, for instance, when you buy a ticket, you can register a bike to show
Okay.
or to bring into the event.
Yeah.
But we basically have moto vendors, tons of great music, obviously a custom motorcycle show, a ride-in motorcycle show. We usually have some kind of stunt entertainment every year, or mini bike racing, or some kind of interactive fun could be had.
Yeah.
Also. So no, it's basically a street festival, motorcycle festival in Chicago, an urban festival, which is kind of unusual, like that it's in downtown Chicago, and it's it embraces the moto culture. It's pretty cool.
Well, and I mean, from what you mentioned, from like the bike riders and a lot of other stuff. I mean, Chicago does have a pretty rich motorcycle history, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It does. It's exactly that. I think the bike riders is a good example, but it does have a good history. I mean, there used to be Santa Fe Speedway. I don't know if that rings a bell to you, but it goes back.
Hmm.
It was the dirt track, oval track on the south side of Chicago, where like all the legends from the 60s and 70s and the 80s, raced there. Gary Nixon and Gene Romero and
Hmm.
all the On Sunday crowd. That was the Chicago. That was the Chicago connection, and it was a little bit depicted in the Bike Riders that
Hmm.
those guys, like the club from the Bike Riders, they wanted a motorcycle race, and that's where they
right.
raced. They raced at Santa Fe Speedway. That was one of the race tracks. So
Hmm.
that was kind of a Chicago legend area. Unfortunately, I think it's been gone since the late '80s, but that was a big part of Chicago culture,
Yeah.
motorcycling culture.
Um, so the other thing is that putting on MOTOBLOT isn't even your full-time job, right?
No,
So
no.
it's something you do on the side, it seems like, or as part of, something to do. What is your full-time gig?
Currently, I'm working, and I have been for a long time. I've been working for Royal Enfield motorcycles,
Okay.
which is obviously the iconic brand from the UK. That was in Redditch, England
Hmm.
since 1901. It's actually the longest continuously manufactured motorcycle company in the world.
That's
I
cool.
think Harley is 1902, and Indians 1901 too, but they have not been continuously manufactured. They went out, came back, went out, came back.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
Royal Enfield, they went through a lot of lean years, but but motorcycles are still coming from India. They're manufactured in India, and the Royal Enfield Bullet lasted. Was originally manufactured in the late 1930s, and
Hmm.
that design was manufactured just up until recently. Like it's kind of the longest continuously manufactured motorcycle.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
They made change. They brought in EFI and disc brakes, and they modernized it. But over the last 10 years, they just built new factories and have completely modernized and are really leading the way in the middleweight motorcycle market
Hmm.
worldwide with what they're doing.
I know you've worked for another British motorcycle manufacturer as well, correct?
Yeah. I was with Triumph back in the I think 2012, 13, 14 in that era. Yeah.
Okay.
So I worked for Triumph. I became affiliated with Triumph because they were sponsoring Mods versus Rockers.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
and so I got to know the people at Triumph. Great folks, and they embraced Mods versus Rockers because it fit their brand.
Yeah.
And through getting to know them, they brought me on board actually as a historian for the brand, and also working in marketing. So I had a lot of fun. I was in Daytona. I think it was 2013, and it was the first time that Triumph won Daytona since like Gary Nixon won it in '67
Oh, wow.
or '68. It was Danny Eslick won on obviously on a new Triumph, and it was great to be there for that because it was the first time in 50 years or whatever.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was, but it was super
Yeah.
cool to see Triumph come. I mean, obviously Triumph's been back since the late '80s with John Blor's reiteration of Triumph. But yeah, I mean, they're a great iconic brand. It
Yeah.
was really fun to work for them.
So I don't know. I think like having the job title of historian for Triumph is probably one of the coolest job titles I've heard. What even went into that job? Like, you know,
Well,
what was your like job? Like, what did you do? Like,
well,
for lack of a better term.
it was cool. It was, like I said, because I got to know the marketing people at Triumph North America, and I already had a relationship with like Gary Nixon and Gene Romero and some of the old racers from that era,
Mhm.
because I was always been into motorcycle racing, so I'd be going to the races, at Mid Ohio or wherever I could go to check out racing. And a lot of those guys were still racing into the 80s and 90s. So when I met the Triumph, they knew that I basically had a pretty good education on Triumph, the historical nature. So they basically they wanted me to be a part of marketing and events, but they wanted me to help with the historical nature, of bringing it to current with what they're doing with bikes now and how people could relate. It was interesting when the Triumph first came back in 1989 or 90, they did embrace their history. They were like,
Really?
Well, they thought that their history was, bad electrics, leaky bikes.
Yeah, I could understand that.
All the stuff that, British bikes kind of got known for, or even British cars for that matter, or, Lucas Electrics. And anyway, they felt that was a detriment, but they didn't, I'm not sure if they understood the brand loyalty that people really had to Triumph.
Sure.
And it's the same thing with Royal Enfield. I mean, Royal Enfield went through the same thing. It was, they were frowned upon as not being, very reliable or leaky, but the fact is, if they were properly maintained and properly, built, that they were great bikes.
Sure.
But so Triumph, I think, they didn't come out with that new Bonneville until like the late 90s. They didn't even, and that became their number one bike pretty fast after they came out with it. Once they decided to embrace their history, I think that really helped with sales, and you can see the whole modern classics has become huge, and Triumph really kind of led the way to a certain extent with that when they brought back the Bonneville and then added the Thruxton and other bikes to the range. But that's kind of how the historian thing came, because it was kind of when they were embracing their history, and they wanted people in marketing that knew the history to a certain extent and could talk the talk.
That's cool, man.
I think that's where it came from.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm like, man, historian for Triumph. Like that's super cool. So
yeah, it was cool. It was cool. And like, I think it was 2002. It was the 100th anniversary of Triumph. They did a ride across. It was called Triumph Across America.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They did a ride from Baltimore, which is where Tricor was. The Triumph importer was in Baltimore, and then there was also the Johnson Motors was the West Coast Triumph importer. So they did a ride from Baltimore to Pasadena, because that's where those places are. And it was called Triumph Across America. And this is before I worked for them, but I had what was a new Bonneville then, like a 2002 Bonneville. And I rode basically across, and there was hundreds of people on this ride. We went from like dealership to dealership, and we ended up in Pasadena, and they had this huge party, and they had Gary Nixon and Gene Romero and Bud Eakins, who was, he had a Triumph dealership, and he was a friend of Steve McQueen's. And so all these great people, a lot of them are gone now, actually. But back then they were all at this event, which was awesome to see all those people and kind of embrace the brand that Triumph was.
Have you been able to go to England and like kind of experience the old British like bike culture firsthand, or no?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was over there. Actually, I went over there, maybe 10 years ago, when I told you about the 59 Club. It's still in existence. And Father Graham Hullett was running the club for many years. He passed away, and they did a memorial ride for Father Graham Hullett. And it was in Paddington, where the 59 Club was. We had like hundreds of rockers riding through London, and we went across Chelsea Bridge, by Battersea Power Station, the Pink Floyd album cover.
Yep.
And so it was called a Rockers Run, for Father Graham Hullett. And so we had hundreds. So I got to actually ride in England. I was lucky enough to get on a Triumph demo and do the ride and do the whole rocker thing. And it's amazing. Obviously, they've got the Ace Cafe in London. They've got the Bike Shed. They've got some amazing motorcycle history in the UK.
Yeah.
So it's a great place to go and check it out.
Yeah, we've talked to, I don't know if you're familiar with TJ Adams and Arthur Coldwell's. They run Ultimate Motorcycling.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And they met in like the 70s, like during like the golden age of British motorcycling. And they were talking about, we just take our bikes and on a Friday, we'd run as fast as we could to the channel and get on the last ferry and then just ride all over Europe. And I'm like, You guys even know how awesome that sounds? Like you guys just had it made, like right all
Yeah.
over England and to all over continental Europe. It was pretty cool to hear about just that magical time in motorcycling, even if you weren't there. So
Yeah, exactly.
what it sounds like really like a big part of your passion for motorcycles is being in clubs and kind of having a community. Where did that kind of come from?
It's interesting to say, but you're right. It's like part of it is like having a place to ride with like-minded enthusiasts. We want to, I think bikers like to kind of hang out in groups and ride in groups. There's something to really be said for that group ride, which is so cool. Like one of the things I do, I organize the Chicago DGR, Distinguished Gentleman's Ride.
Oh yeah.
And I've been doing that for years, and it's great camaraderie, getting people together. And the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride is, a fantastic cause. It's done all over the world on the same day. And it's embraced, and I think it's been going on for over 10 years now, but I mean, it's the same thing. It's people, guys that have bikes, they want to hang out and they want to bench race and they want to, talk bikes and to give them a place to do that, a place to go, a place to hang out and be with like-minded, people that love bikes. That's that's the kind of thing behind the bike nights that I do in Chicago too. It's just a thing to do, get out, hey, it's Motorcycle Mondays. Let's get on, let's go over and kick some tires and talk bikes, so it's kind of bringing the scene together to a certain extent. And it probably comes from my bar experience and club experience. Cause I kind of developed, the love of doing motorcycle events from being in clubs and stuff like that. Being the dance clubs of the, the 80s. And it's just, it's a niche. It's a micro niche of people, but that are like-minded enthusiasts basically.
Yeah, no, I feel you. And, how, you've obviously had a lot of experience in like motorcycle clubs and organizations. How does somebody that isn't part of a club like that, what's the best way for somebody to start to get involved in something like that?
Really, it depends where you are, but you definitely connect, find out where the local kind of, every city's got their local meetups and things like that. I mean, now the Moto Social, I'm sure you've heard the Moto Social is a big thing internationally, and those happen in cities all over the world. But it kind of depends where you are and find that. And if you don't know, you can go to your local, bike shop or talk to the people at the dealerships and, hey, what's going on in this town? Like, where can I go to hang out? In Chicago, we do Motorcycle Mondays once a month. It's the first Monday of the month, and it's at a place called O'Donovan's, and they got a big parking lot. And each month we do a different country of origin. So So May, like the first Monday of May, is always German night. And the reason we do it, because the weather can be horrible in early May in Chicago. It can be 40 degrees or it can be 80 degrees. You don't know.
It's probably raining. Yeah.
Yeah. But the BMW Owners Club guys, they ride no matter what, man. They got the gear. They got the heated grips. They're good to go no matter what. So, so each month we do a different, June is British, July is American because we do it right around the 4th of July. But each month we do a different country. But that gives a chance for people who have different motorcycles of country of origin, like Italian bikes, Japanese bikes. They can all show up and kind of have camaraderie within their circle of, bikes. They're all riding similar stuff. It's kind of cool to see all those bikes together in one spot. Vintage and modern. And we give out a trophy, for the most popular bike of that month, that night. And just a reason that, like I said, it's another reason to get together and kick tires and have fun.
Yeah, for sure. Well, between all of this, event planning, the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride, obviously MOTOBLOT, the monthly meetups that you're doing, plus your full-time job, do you ever get a chance to go take any trips on a motorcycle or do any touring, or you keep it pretty local?
I do when I can, but you're right. Luckily through my job, I ride a lot.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I do most of the national events. Like this last year, we went to the Smoky Mountain Bike Week down near Asheville, and we got to ride every day these amazing roads. Right?
I was going to say that's a beautiful area that I don't feel like a lot of people know about.
Yeah, it's like Blue Ridge Parkway and the Appalachian Trail, and I mean, it's just amazing riding. And and it's part of my job. And we were doing basically extended demo rides, so people could sign up, and it was like a 3-hour ride. Instead of like going for like a 20-minute ride, it was actually, we rode like, it was basically a 3-hour ride. So we were doing, so that's what I, that's what I was doing. Basically, and so I've got that opera. I mean, we do demo rides all over the, Royal Enfield. We're all over the country and national events. So I do a lot of my riding, but when I do get home and I do have a chance to ride with my friends, it is fun to get to do that. But I am pretty busy. Most weekends they keep me busy, right? Sure. But at least I'm riding motorcycles, right?
Yeah. So, yeah. What's your favorite part of putting on, it doesn't necessarily have to be a certain like event or section of MOTOBLOT, but like what to you is most rewarding about putting MOTOBLOT on?
It's it's the people, that I see year after year. And it's funny. There's people that have met at MOTOBLOT that have gotten married.
Wow. Okay.
And now they've met at MOTOBLOT, they got married. Now they show up, they bring their kids, it's been going on so long that, we've had multiple couples that have met, got married, and have brought their kids, and just seeing, like I said, there's a community. It's a community, and just seeing everybody and meeting new people, because new people come in every year.
Sure.
It's definitely that, just seeing people smile and being thankful that they have the opportunity to kind of come together in this way. We call them Moto family, but they're they like to come together, and they all see each other too. Like I said, they don't get to see each other all the time, but they all run into each other at MOTOBLOT. So it's a big family,
Yeah.
And it's kind of regional and national. There's people that come from all over the country, and even some people from around the world that we see year after year, and it's it's a chance it's a reunion to a certain extent.
Can you share, maybe, I don't know how much is secret yet or anything like that, or has yet to be revealed, but what's like the biggest, most exciting thing maybe that you're most excited for that's going to be new this year?
Well, we're right now we're booking the talent. So because we're moving to the Salt Shed, which is a large live music venue, that enables us to bring in bigger music acts. So I can't announce anything yet, but we're getting super close. But we're going to have national music talent. Bands performing along with all the motorcycle stuff. So it's kind of cool. It brings together kind of like that culture. The bands we book definitely are, bands that we think that our crowd's going to like. So we're going to want to bring in the right kind of music, and we're really excited about this year. So I'm really excited about the music end of it, elevating the music this year, which I think is going to really help make it a big event this year.
Cool. We'll just have to wait and see, but it almost sounds like too that it's really, you've almost brought like you put it in a time machine or a time capsule, where it's like, it's like a snapshot of like vintage bikes, because you said like vintage fashion, vintage style music. Like it sounds like you're really trying to just bring us all back to that like 50s, 60s, 70s kind of era.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't mention, but one of the things we do is the pinup contest, which it's a 40s, 50s style. Pinup culture is another big part of moto culture and really hot rod culture to a certain extent. And it's the same thing. It's just appreciation of that era. So like the pinup contest is basically a vintage style pinup. And it's a big part, and it brings a lot of women to the event. Sometimes motorcycle events can be a little overwhelming with men. And I'm really excited that more and more women are getting into motorcycling, and it's more and more every year, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But you still need to kind of bringing a little glamour and color to the event.
Sure.
And the pinup contest definitely adds an extra level of cool to the event.
Class up the joint a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you seeing more and more women like ride motorcycles through MOTOBLOT or through Royal Enfield, or kind of both?
I think both. It's definitely increased over the last 20 years. Women's ridership, the numbers are, continue to grow on women riders, which is fabulous. And there's lots of women that are on the internet, and they're like Itchy Boots. I don't know if you've heard of her. Itchy Boots. Like she's ridden all around the world. Sometimes on a Royal Enfield, but on other brands too. But she rode like a Himalayan from like South America, all the way to, Alaska. She's ridden around the world basically. Just wild. Yeah. So, that brings more and more women into the motorcycle culture. And Royal Enfield definitely tries to reach those riders. And like I said, it's because of middleweight bikes and smaller bikes, entry level riding bikes. It's important because we have to reach the new riders. I think that's one of the places the motorcycle industry is really focusing, is trying to get younger riders, new riders involved in motorcycling.
Yeah. Because I was going to say, you through Royal Enfield, you guys kind of walk the walk when it comes to that with Build Train Ride.
Yeah, Build Train Race.
Build Train Race. I'm sorry. Yeah, Build Trade Trade. Jeez, I can't get it right. You said it, so we'll go with that.
Yeah, Build Train Race. Yeah, no,
Thank
that's
you.
a program. Yeah, it's a program that's been going on for 4 or 5 years now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for women. It's women racers, and it's both. It's flat track discipline and road race discipline. On 650 Royal Enfields. You know, we have the Interceptor and the GT. So the Interceptor is kind of like the flat track bike, and the GT is the road race. And so it's awesome. I mean, they sign up like 10 riders a year in each road race and flat track, and they embrace and bring these. And so, as you know, at these races, they have the Build Train Race category, you know.
Yeah.
And the women get out there, and every year, man, they're getting better and more competitive and faster. It's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, it's really cool to see.
Yeah, I was up at this was like 2 years ago. I was up at Elkhart Lake at Road America.
Yeah.
The super bike races up there, and I was looking at what they were doing first, because I think the BTR racers were riding first. Like, man, these guys are like, and they're all like really neck and neck, and I mean, it's cool to watch. And then I learned that they build and work on them themselves. You can see them kind of outside on the paddock or whatever. I was like, that's super cool, you know.
Yeah.
And they're all Enfields, which I think is super cool too.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Those things scream, man.
They do. No, it's really cool. Yeah, the women they build their own bikes. They have to work within certain parameters. They can only do so. Obviously, you want it to be a fair fight out there, a fair race. So there's limited things they can do, but they work on their own bikes, and they make sure that they're road ready, and they get out there and they tear it up, man. It's pretty impressive to see.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool, and it grows every year, and it does. It brings more women riders into the sport and into motorcycle racing, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. I had to ask you about that. So, what else? I mean, you've been in the industry for a few decades. What else have you kind of seen? And we talked about at the beginning about, you know, what's old is new again. What kind of changes have you seen maybe over the last like 5-10 years? And where do you think maybe motorcycling is maybe headed next, or what the next kind of trend was going to be?
Well, there's obviously the EV bike. I mean, the electric bikes is kind of, I mean, it seems like to a certain extent, some people are going to be pulled kicking and screaming into the electric scene.
The electric world, right?
I've been pretty lucky. I mean, I've had, I don't know if you've heard of Zooz, Z-O-O-Z, but they make like an electric bicycle. So I started on an electric bicycle 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
Around Chicago, and it's so easy to get around on, right? It's like you don't have to have a light driver's license or insurance, and you can park it wherever you want. And you're faster than traffic. And then the motorcycles are coming out. You know, I know Royal Enfield's got the Flying Flea that's coming soon, which is their electric bike. So I've had a chance to ride a lot of electric bikes. I definitely can see the future there. And it's definitely coming, but a lot of people are going to be pulled kicking and screaming into that era. They don't want to give up on their internal combustion motors, and I get it totally. But it's definitely the future, and it's cool to see the manufacturers diversify and kind of embrace what's coming.
Yeah. You know, talking about the time that you've been in the motorcycle world, it seems like your passion's only just gotten stronger. And what's kept motorcycles so special for you? What's kept you in the game for so long?
I think I still love to ride.
Yeah.
It's you hear everybody say it, but it's that freedom. You know, it's that. I mean, it's funny when I went and saw the bike riders last year with my daughter. I mean, they had the scene of them all riding across the bridge. She's ridden with me tons in the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride.
Oh, sure.
It almost made her cry because she's like, that's that feeling of being on the road with friends and the open road, and it's there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it in the world. It's that open road feeling and riding with your friends and going places and doing things. It's pretty cool.
I love it. Well, I think that that's a perfect note to end on. So, Fletch, thank you so much for your time and sharing some awesome motorcycle history and your story and everything. Tell me just kind of all the quick details about MOTOBLOT, where somebody can find it, when it is, how to get a ticket to it, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. It's going to be June 27th to 29th this year in Chicago. And it's easy to find. It's motoblot.com. So it's MOTOBLOT.com. And that's and we're on Instagram and Facebook and social media. So the website's the best place to go, but you can just Google MOTOBLOT and that's pretty much the only thing that comes up. When I was rethinking a name, I was like, I got to come up with something that no one else is going to use.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody else is using it. So.
Right, exactly. So motoblot.com, and we're just about to announce the bands in the next couple of weeks, but the dates are set. So, save June 27th to the 29th for Chicago and MOTOBLOT.
Yeah, man. It's already in my calendar. So, can't wait to come check it out, and we'll talk. I hope we'll talk before then, but if we don't, we'll see you in MOTOBLOT.
Sounds good. It's great talking to you.
All right, thanks, Fletch. See ya.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Driven to Ride. Interact with us and check out full unedited conversations, photos, interviews, video interviews, plus other goodies on YouTube or Instagram at Driven to Ride Podcast. Or you can check us out at driventoridepodcast.com. And make sure you leave us a rating and review from wherever you get your podcasts, too. If you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or you want to invite us out on an adventure, email us hello@driventoridepodcast.com. Driven to Ride is wholly owned by Flint Rock LLC, made possible with help from Matthew Miles, and written, hosted, and produced by me, Mark Long. We'll see you out there.